where I got to speak to Bill Flynn, who's taken us back to the days of the Regal Theatre. Sit back, relax, as we raise the curtain with Bill.
The Clonmel Podcast.
On the podcast for this Friday, it's a pleasure to be joined by Bill Flynn from Silver Springs in Clonmel. Bill, welcome to the podcast.
How are you, Mark?
I'm good. Great to talk to you. Let's talk about the Regal Theatre, if we can. Now, you were general manager there from 1995 to 97.
Yeah, when it reopened, it had been a cinema, and which closed, and the premises were bought by Larry and Helen O'Keefe, and they converted back into a theatre, and it was actually the fourth largest theatre in Ireland.
No way.
With 862 seats.
Wow.
And it was ideal because you had sort of 300 seats in the front stalls, 300 in the back, and then the balance were up in the balcony.
So there was no shortage, Bill, of getting people in to see the acts?
Well, the entertainment business, particularly in Ireland, a lot of it is word of mouth.
Yeah.
So this was a new venue, so you had people saying, oh, well, not sure we'll go there until we see how it's going. But I was lucky that I had quite a few contacts in entertainment, and I got them then to bring in some of the acts, and we ended up with, let's call them the A acts of Ireland, and quite a lot of international artists such as Billy Connolly and Cors.
Hang on. Billy Connolly played the Regal?
Yes.
Really?
Not a tribute act, the Billy Connolly.
What year was this?
1996.
I can't believe that.
Yeah. And he did 2 3/4 hours straight, no interval. And I remember people leaving saying they'd gladly walk around, pay and go back in for another 2 3/4 hours.
And did you meet the big Ian himself? What was he like?
Yeah. He was lovely. I mean, his rider was the shortest you've ever seen. He literally asked for, this is quite funny, it was a flat bar stool on the stage. And in the dressing room, a television. It didn't matter if it didn't have sound. And he wasn't to be disturbed in his dressing room for 20 minutes before he went on stage.
You see, you got me thinking now, when you mention riders, which are basically what the stars ask for, what they request, in case people don't know. I love when I hear these stories. Come on then. So outrageous riders that people who would have played at the Regal asked for. What have you got?
Well, the chorus had 15 pages of a rider.
You're joking.
And it was, I'm serious, everything from cranberry juice to, they wanted a lot of snacks down the dressing rooms and that.
And did you pop next door to Drohan's to get them?
We had to go all over the town to get them. And my daughter said, look, Dad, I'd look after that. She was only 14 at the time, but she did, so she catered for them. But they had now, they were okay, but I think this was MCD at the time.
Oh, yeah.
So they've just been pernickety.
Yeah, they are.
But generally, a lot of them were very easy. I mean, one of my favourite acts there was Jerry Marsden.
Yeah.
And Jerry had no rider whatsoever.
This is Jerry Ferry across the Mersey?
Yes. Yeah. And it was, what he actually did was he did the history of pop music based around Liverpool. Now, he had 10 people on stage with himself. And at times, 4 of the guys would take on and do all the Beatles stuff.
Yeah.
And every single one, you had Little Richard, you had Lulu, the whole lot of them. And each and every person on the stage could take off the artist perfectly.
Nothing worse than a bad impersonation, is there, Bill?
No, these were absolutely spot on. But the problem with that act was people didn't believe it was the Jerry Marsden of the Pacemakers. So they thought it was a tribute act, so therefore the place wasn't sold out.
Oh my God.
I know, but we had the same with Billy Connolly. Someone said to me, oh, I presume that's a tribute act. I said, no, it's not. And they said, what? Billy Connolly in Clonmel.
Well, like I was gobsmacked. I didn't know that. I was gobsmacked myself when you just told me that.
Yeah, we also had Grand Opera, which had an orchestra of 39 people. And the whole company was 120 people. So we literally filled the hotels in Clonmel.
See, that's great because you're bringing a lot of business into the town.
Yeah, well, the amazing thing was I met the owner of the B&B the week before the opera.
Mm.
And he said to me, what the hell is going on in the opera? Or, sorry, in the Regal. I said, it's Grand Opera. Oh, he said, I was wondering. He said, I had the ambassador from Australia on the phone looking for bed because he said he couldn't get a room in the town and he was going to the Regal Theatre.
That's unbelievable, isn't it?
Well, with 120 of them in cast, crew, etc. They were from Moldova, Romania, Russia. There were 5 interpreters in the company.
And I also believe that Andrew Lloyd Webber was very complimentary to the Regal Theatre, wasn't he?
Yeah, he came in and the first question he had was, how many seats have you got? So I told him 862. He said, shame you haven't 1,000. He said, that's the magic. So I went into the middle of the auditorium, clapped his hands, and he said, oh my God. He said, this is the best natural acoustic I've ever come across. And that was proved numerous times. RTE could come in, not even mic the stage. They just stick a mic up in the lighting box, which was at the back of the venue, and record from there.
Perfect theatre.
Yep.
And who else would have played there, Bill?
Oh, this was on all the Irish ones, Joe Dolan, Brendan Grace. Actually, the very last live performance of Dermot Morgan was in the Regal.
Dermot was in the Regal?
Yeah, that was the last live because the Irish Times rang me to say Dermot was dead and wanted an interview.
So this would have been roughly
1996.
So he was still doing Father Ted, wasn't he?
Well, he wasn't really doing Father Ted. It was just general stand-up.
No, what I mean was he doing the TV show?
Yeah, he would have been, yeah.
Oh, my God. And how did you find Dermot Morgan?
He was very down to earth, no problems. Nice guy, very few demands. I wouldn't even say demands, just requests. And he came in, did this show, went. Now, Dunbelievables were another. They sold out for 10 nights on a row.
Hugely popular, though. John Kenny, Pat Shaw.
Oh, they were unbelievable. But I mean, to sell out a venue like that for 10 nights,
yeah,
the trot. And when I left the Regal, I went to the University Concert Hall in Limerick and got them there to do the same thing, to do 10 nights in a row.
I mean, when you look back at the Regal Theatre now, I know Larry O'Keefe has it, and, you know, it's all part of his business now. Do you think it should have just been left as a theatre? Could it have sustained that?
No, unfortunately, Mark, it couldn't, because, like, we did try to get grants, grant aid, you know, get anything. And they just said, no, sorry, it's a commercial venture. So there was no grant aid from anywhere. And I mean, the rates, you can imagine, IMRO, the cost of artists. And, you know, Clonmel wouldn't sustain a theatre having, you know, 3-4 acts every week. Yeah. And you needed that. So, you know, if there had been a little bit of grant aid or even a bit of relief on rates or something, it would have been great.
I mean, just reading up a bit on the history of the theatre, built on the site of the John Magna Theatre, which was opened in 1913, sadly destroyed by fire in 1919. Then it opened on the 28th of March, 1921. Yes.
And it would, like, from talking to people, I mean, that was the first stage that the famous Clonmel boy, Frank Patterson, as a child, acted and sang on. And the night we reopened in November 95, when the show was over, I went in and saw I had a missed call. And there was a voicemail from Frank Patterson from New York, wishing us all well in the theatre and looking forward to the next time he'd be in Ireland and performing there.
And of course, Frank only living up the road.
Yeah.
Rahley Avenue, that's correct, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the theatre brought back a lot of memories. I managed to talk Maureen Potter into coming down to Clonmel. Now, she was quite elderly at the time, wasn't moving outside Dublin.
Yeah.
But we got her down, and her memories of the theatre were unbelievable. She could remember every single thing about there, and she used to be there quite a lot, apparently, in the early 50s.
That's amazing.
She gave quite a good story that her whole cast were invited in to Magners. They were still brewing at the time.
Yeah.
And they were going around, and one of the party anyway was handed this glass, and he just put it on his head. He presumed it was a glass of water. It was pure alcohol. And she said they couldn't even leave him near the stage after that. She said legless wasn't the words for it. I said the same guy didn't drink at all.
And that's so funny, isn't it? Because you're right. You mentioned Magna's Bar next door to the theatre. I mean, that's where people would go for a drink before popping into the Regal.
Yes.
And a great old bar it was too.
Well, there was a lovely story came from that actually I was visiting the concert on Limerick a few years later, and the director there said to me, we had the opera company here last week. I said, yes, I knew that. And he said, Ellen Kent, who produced the operas, said her greatest memory of Ireland was sitting in a pub beside the Regal Theatre in Clonmel on a rainy night, and she said you could hear the drops of water coming down the chimney and hitting the turf. And she said you look out the window and see a sold out sign and see all the people going into the opera. And she said she then suddenly looked at her watch and she realised it was 8:10. And she got into a bit of a flurry. And someone said, what's wrong? She says, 8:10, the show. She said, it'll start when they're ready. She thought that was priceless.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
And I remember, it's funny because, I can recall even on holidays, we'd come over from London to Clonmel, where both my folks are from, and they'd always, the first port of call was to go into Magna's Bar for a drink, and there was a fantastic man behind the bar. Sadly, no longer with us, John O'Mahony. What a gentleman that man was.
He certainly was. And like when the theatre was open, we didn't have a bar initially, so the 3 pubs there, we had a tip off, and some of my crew would go up and just ring a bell at the end of the interval, and the people would all leave the pub and come back to the theatre.
Brilliant. That is
but
so.
It worked.
It did work, and worked very, very well. Can I ask you something as well? Who was the last act to play at the Regal?
Ooh, well, it closed when I left in 97, and then it reopened for a very, very short time.
Ah, okay.
But I'm not even sure because I was gone to UCH at that stage. So I honestly couldn't tell. Probably one of the most exciting things was getting Daniel O'Donnell there.
Nice one.
Because I knew Kieran Kavanagh, who was his producer. And I had asked Kieran, I said, look, and he said, no. He said, you haven't 1,000 seats. Sorry. So I just kept nagging him, literally. And I rang him one day and said, Kieran, one request. I said, sometime you're coming back from Cork, going up to Dublin, nip down to Clonmel and just come in and see the theatre. Which he did, and he just said, I love it. And now he had a few provisos, but he said, right, we put in Daniel, but the tickets are not to go on sale until such a time. And he said, you cannot sell or release any tickets before that date. Because he said, if Daniel hears that happened, he'll pull the date. So we said, fine. So local radio called me in when they heard Daniel was coming. I did an interview, and I have to admit, Mark, I told a little bit of a white lie.
Oh, Bill, shame on you.
Yeah. And I don't know where the notion came, and I just happened to say, oh, I believe people are going to queue all night for the tickets. Total fabrication. And that happened.
No way.
We had the tickets went on sale, let's say, whatever date, but it was a Saturday morning. And on the Friday night, there was a show on in the Regal. So you had the queue coming up past Johan's shop to go into the theatre. And there was a queue heading down towards, which is now the shopping centre.
Yes, it's called the showground.
10 o'clock the next morning.
Wow.
For the tickets. And when the show that was on the Friday night finished, my two techies said, listen, we can't leave the people out there on their own all night. They might need to go to a toilet or something. So we're staying here. I said, right, well, I'm staying. So I rang Tesco.
Yeah.
And, no, it was Super Quinn at the time, sorry. And they sent down all their unused pastries from the day. And we made tea. And we had a street party.
Fantastic.
And there's actually a photograph of one of my crew showing a clock down to the crowd, and it shows 5:30 in the morning. And the queue was down as far as the shopping centre now.
That's a great story.
The whole, like all 862 tickets sold out in 54 minutes.
And I have to ask, Bill, what was Daniel's rider?
Very little, to be honest.
Nice cup of tea.
Yeah, and an area to meet the people after it.
That means a lot, though, doesn't it?
It does, but I mean, I was a little sceptical about Daniel as a person, but I was proved so wrong that night, because at about 6 o'clock somebody left a letter into the Regal addressed to Daniel, and I brought it down to his dressing room, gave it to him, and he started to read it, and he just said to me, oh, where's such and such a place? I obviously don't want to say the place, Mark. I said, it's about 15 minutes from here. He said, I have to go. Now, this was 7:45. The show was starting at 8.
Oh, dear.
Mary Duff was on stage at 8. Daniel's manager nearly had a heart attack. He said, you can't leave. He said, I have to go. So it transpired to this person who is handicapped had been out of the country when tickets went on sale. And she just wanted Daniel to give a request to her, even though she couldn't be at the concert. So I had to drive him out to this person's house. And they went in, chatted, took the photograph back, and barely got back at about 10 to 9. Now, there was no publicity to be gained from this. You know, and I just realised, I said, yeah, he is so genuine.
Just a nice gesture to go and meet that person.
Yeah.
That's a lovely thing to do.
I said it to Mary Duff, because Mary used to be in a band with me at one stage. I said, you know, is he as genuine as they're saying? And she said, 100%.
That's lovely.
So, yeah, I was really impressed with it. And we asked the people, after the queuing all night, you know, if we'd given you the tickets the night before. No, we wouldn't have missed this party for anything.
And did Daniel know they were queuing all night?
He was in America, in Branston at the time, and he actually rang me from there, because Kieran Kavanagh rang him to say, this venue has sold out in 55 minutes. Not 1 cent, Mark, was spent on advertising.
It just goes to show, though, how popular he was, though.
Yeah.
And still is to this day. Let's face it, he's still a big draw, isn't he?
Oh, he is, yeah. But back then he was really, really huge. You know, we did have quite a few total sellouts. The operas particularly.
Yeah.
They were, I mean, RTE came down. It was the very, very first opera, and I remember hearing the broadcast after and said, yeah, we're in Clonmel for Grand Opera. Yes, Clonmel, and this is not coming to Dublin. The reason was the Opera House in Cork, Concert Hall in Limerick, and ourselves decided to bring in the operas to just do that triangle, as we felt Dublin got too much.
True.
And that's the way it stuck.
Well, do you know what? Bill Flynn, General Manager of the Regal Theatre from 1995 to 1997. I thoroughly enjoyed a trip down memory lane of the Regal Theatre, and thank you so much for joining me on the Clonmel Podcast this week.
Not at all, Mark. Pleasure. Good to talk to you.
The Clonmel Podcast.
Now, coming next week, if you worked in